the test is, again, going back, is people are ready to spend money. If they're saying, I'm ready to give you a check, if you can give me that, and this is again an enterprise way of doing things, right? So in the consumer world, slightly different. They may not pay for it, but if they are ready to use it, and a lot of people are, and they are ready to recommend to their friends and do it. You're hitting a sweet spot there, right? So there's different nuances, but it boils down to you have to really address a product market fit very early on, and it's okay to take time, because if you build something the market is not ready, that's going to cost you years in a lost R&D investment and other things.
All right, everybody, welcome. And I am so excited today for having this interview because who I have in my front virtually is none other than Balaji. He is my friend. We have worked together in past when I was in my programming roles, and I have worked closely in some of the initiatives with him. And then I have seen him grow as an incredible entrepreneur, starting one startup to another startup. And the thing I love about him is his humility. After all the success he has, he's so humble. Every time I message and ask for help, he's already available. Always available for his friends. So that is the thing I love about him, and that is the reason I have him here, because I want to bring on people who represent something they have. It's not the success that matters, it's how you get successful that matters. So welcome, Balaji, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Manpreet. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to work with you. Congratulations on your new initiative. It's amazing what you're doing, that bringing the community together and building assets that can help everybody. So incredible to see and incredible to work with you, and incredible to see this growth as well.
Thank you. So we'll dive right into it, because I know Balaji's schedule is very tight and he has to jump quickly after this recording. So let's start with your upbringing, your journey so far. Share with us how and you were raised, where you were born, and a little bit on your journey so far.
Absolutely. So again, thanks for the opportunity to share my story. I was born in India, and I was born in a southern part of India, in a state called Tamil Nadu. I was born there, spent my initial childhood there, and then my dad got transferred. He was in the central government role. He was working for Department of Telecom in Indian government, and he got transferred to the capital, Delhi, and that's when I moved very young. When I was around 8, I moved to Delhi. Complete transformation, because your language and everything is very different, and so you're going into a school where you don't even understand what people are talking about, and in that way, I was born and raised talking some other language, and the entire environment was different. It was a little unnerving initially, but as kids, I think we are all adaptable, and I think we adapt fairly quickly. And so my siblings, we all adapted fairly quickly, and I grew up in Delhi and enjoyed Delhi. So I grew up, all my schooling, my colleges were all in North India, and so yeah, even though I look South Indian a little bit, but I sometimes talk, but that gave a very different perspective, right? So a different perspective of appreciation of how diverse India is in terms of culture, and how diverse India is in terms of everything it does, right? And it's so much variations within the same country. And we always go back and forth during summer holidays. My summer holidays will go on, or every other holidays will go this long train back from Delhi to South India, to Chennai and other places, and got an appreciation of all the variations of states that come in between. And so, in sense, you get a better sense of geography, I would say, with those trips. But it gives a very different perspective of growing appreciation of that. And I did my engineering, I did my postgrad MBA in India, and then had an opportunity to come to US through a job with Infosys. which was my first, probably my second gig after my MBA. And we had a customer called Apple at that time, which is fairly growing. They were setting up retail stores, and part of my team's job was to help Apple expand retail. They're setting up retail stores in the US, and they were expanding that to other countries. It was one of the best times in the Valley because Apple was growing, exploding. Right? This was when you are part of Apple, in the atrium, they would go and do keynotes. And so you have Steve Jobs come in, and everybody in the company is just engrossed in those keynotes. And that was the time they launched iPod, and then soon after that, they launched the iPhone. But it was a magical time in Apple. It was fairly growing fast, and everybody was really excited to do that, contribute. So even though we belonged to Infosys, it was really exciting to work for Apple and being part of the company. And we had badges, Apple badges, and we were pretty much part of the Apple culture as part of it. So very exciting time to spend in Infosys. Then I switched over from Infosys and joined IBM, which was really good experience of working with a global company, but soon realized that, hey, I was not meant for a large matrix organization. So my IBM journey was fairly short, like a year and a half, and didn't see a fit. But at that point, I kind of realized in my career that me and I'm just not made for working through a large, in some cases, bureaucratic organizations, and as part of it. Maybe it was impatience in me and wanting to do things more faster and less hindrances of doing things. But I didn't see myself, working 20, 25 years, 30 years in a large public org and working through the change and having that patience to do that. In general, that impatience has driven me into doing many things. So I ended up on a whim, talking to somebody who my wife has met in the plane, and that person was running a company, was at least heading some portion of the company called SkillNet. And so he said, "Hey, let's chat." So went on a whim, talked and liked the fact that it was a smaller company, and given I was an IBM, that's the direction I was going. Is I either would do a small company or do a startup, and so I ended up on a whim joining in sales, and never done sales before, but as part of consulting org. But this is something directionally I wanted to do, and say, hey, this is a good opportunity. No idea what sales was about, no idea what it entails, but it was a fun ride with SkillNet, and that's when I got to meet you as well, right, with SkillNet. But you always had this notion of, hey, I got to start a company at some point in time, and fortunately, in 2011, I started working, and 2012, I started working with another gentleman who's my current co-founder in the startup. I met him through the folks at SkillNet. So, we explored a few ideas took off. And one of the ideas was around big data and security. Again, no idea on that part of it. But I felt like this is the right time for me to go and jump out. So I moved away from SkillNet and from a comfortable job, which was fairly comfortable. SkillNet was doing okay, to go and do a startup. And I know we were in the right place, right time at that time, and I was around big data and security. And big data kind of was exploding at that time. And from marketing, this is 2013. And we were soon acquired in 2014 by another big data company called Hortonworks. I joined the company there and led security and governance, but we always felt, we haven't fully solved the problem. And Privacera is a take two of that and of solving that security problem, and in a much broader way. So we are 5 years in the company, we're growing, the market is growing, but it's fun. It's fun being, taking a company from a piece of paper now to fairly 200-person plus organization today, and we're growing as part of it. Different challenges, and as you have kids, and as well in every stage of your kid, it's a different challenge, and that you come. But that's what you sign up for, and that's what you sign up for it. So I enjoy being part of the company building process. I enjoy the fact enjoy the fact of being able to contribute every day if you need to. And it's a learning, and you learn so much every day. But it also it's enormous time, and it's not. Looking back, you always think about maybe you should have stuck to a 9 to 5 job at some point, and that's one way of looking at things. But I think in startups you're creating value, you're creating something every day, but there are so many things that's not in your control that got to have a perspective on saying, hey, there are things you can control and do it, but some things may plan up, some things may not, and that's what you always have to have a perspective on. So that's my journey so far. So being in the U.S. for about 17 years now in the Bay Area. Have 2 kids, 13 and 10, growing. I'm glad they are back in school after COVID. So, but we're blessed with being part of good friends, good co-workers throughout the way as part of it. So that's what I've been always say. Hey, I'm fortunate to be in midst of really good people throughout my journey.
Amazing. There are parts about your journey I didn't know because we never went that far in there. But it's amazing. There are so many things there. For the listeners who do not know about the geographic and the cultural aspects of India, India is a country where your culture changes every 8 kilometers. The language, the food, everything about the culture changes. So I can imagine going from, all the way from the south to all the way to the north. It's a cultural shock in itself. But if I look at the differences between India and US in a way, even though we have such a diverse culture, it's unnerving, but it's also easier to settle. Like we don't have the similar challenges that US has in terms of the culture, and you move from state to state. Yep. So coming back to your job, I didn't know you didn't have any sales background. So, and it was never apparent to anybody in Skillnet, or at least to myself. I remember the first time, or not first time, but one of the meetings we were in, and this is where I knew you were, different than the other people that I had met in sales. There was an account you were working with, and there was a budget allocated by a customer. And, one of the managers, your managers wanted to spend it all, but you wanted to just spend enough to get the work done, but also save something. And there was a little bit of argument, but this showed that you wanted to do it right way from the get-go. It wasn't, there. So how was it the sales for you? Like, did you have to invest in self-learning to learn?
Yeah. And I think it's a great question. No, I think part of my background when I was part of Infosys, and like you're always customer facing, right? So Apple was a customer for Infosys, and you're working in Apple offices, so you always are looking at and having the customer up front and working very closely with the customer, right? It's not like you're sitting back in the office. So you learn a lot of, even when you go from school to first jobs, and you learn a lot about those soft skills, right? So soft skills of how do you work with a customer? How do you understand that person as a human and try to think from their perspective, right? So try to understand what they are looking at, why they are saying what they're saying. And I think that's an important attribute for any customer facing roles that you have, is to have that appreciation, have that understanding of you can go into a room, but if you instantly can understand what the person is thinking about and their journey, you have a better way of having a conversation, right? And having with that. And that's something I learned part of the consulting role, right? So which is not just only delivering that, but you are in meetings, you are going back and forth, and sometimes emotions are high. Like you really need to understand and be a calm face at some point and say, hey, all right, let's always part of that. And the other part of this is, how do you solve a problem, right? And that's something you pick it up, is you pick a problem and dissect it and say, okay, let's look at this one first, and let's look at this one. How do you break a bigger problem into smaller components? And those are some things I picked in school and in the initial part of work, is the interfacing, the kind of problem solving approaches, and knowing that you can't solve everything on day one. How do you put together a plan, and how do you dissect bigger things into smaller things and have everybody focus on it? Is something you pick it up, and that was fairly useful in my journey. And when I joined SkillNet, is where the role is where you're bringing a partner like someone like Oracle and customer, and it's a three-way conversation together. But a lot of the nuances around how do you work and interface with customers really helped, right? And also understanding why a customer is certainly doing certain things in their technology journey. They are making certain decisions, what their needs are. Even if you're front facing in sales, you really need to understand why the customer is doing certain things. And if you're able to have an appreciation of that, and that's immensely valuable. And then you have to then figure out how do you move the needle forward, right? How do you bring everybody together and bring different parties together to move the needle forward? In this case, move the needle forward to go and win a deal. And it's constantly, you have to solve the problem, break it into chunks, and then do that. So I would say those approaches really helped and set a foundation, even though I was not title-wise, did not have a sales role. But the attributes of those things that I initially worked with when I was at Infosys really helped. Even prior to my schooling in MBA and others, really helps you have that approaches of problem solving and other parts of it.
Yeah, and I can relate to it. Like when you just look at sales as a sales, and it can be daunting, but when you look at from the angle of problem solving, you're listening to the problem and solving the problem, and if you solve the problem, sales just become the byproduct of it.
Exactly.
And I think you also touched upon a very a big point, like dissecting problems, bigger problems into smaller, because sometimes we just overwhelm ourselves with those bigger problems. So,
Yep.
Question: since you were in Apple, and so I'm going back, but and you mentioned you were able to, sit in the keynotes and see that. So you basically were able to listen to Steve Jobs in person and hear the keynotes. How was the experience?
I would say in some places you can do something in physical. In other things, what they would do is they beam the keynotes in every building, and part of that. So I've been part of both. It's an amazing experience, right? So and as now we are building the company, the energy levels that Apple had at that time was the sheer excitement everybody had was immense, right? And then the sheer excitement pervaded through the organization. It was, you feel like, hey, we're creating something magical that people love, right? And even though you're not directly maybe involved in designing an iPod or anything, even being part of an organization, even people we would interact with in IT organizations or Apple, you could see and feel the excitement. And because this was early 2000s, Apple was in trouble. So people who were gone through the .com days and now seeing the newer version of Apple, they were extremely excited about that. Right? So you can talk to the old timers and say, hey, like, things were really not that great in the late 90s and early 2000s. Now, it's starting to come. And this was when iPod was probably one of the first breakout device that Steve purely led, right? So, and that was magic. And after that came the series of ones like iPhones and other things. But there's also a part of what I always learned from someone like Steve. It's a part of storytelling, right? So it's essentially, and it's in the way you can get, and for the period of 45, 1 hour, or whatever that keynote is, you would hear, I've been in places where you're stuck to a projector and a monitor, and everybody in the company is looking at it and dropping everything and listening to listen to Steve, right? So, and saying, hey, something is going to come, he's going to have some cool stuff in the keynote, and it always happens, right? And you'll always keep something at the end and say, hey, one more thing. And it was a famous thing that he had. So storytelling and the art of doing that is something every leader can learn about from Steve Jobs. It was fairly magical for somebody who has maybe not had a professional training or CEO, but the way he would tell the story, he can bind an audience together is amazing.
Yeah, I remember the keynotes speak of his iPhone launch. I saw it on YouTube back then, but it was amazing. And so, having that sort of exposure to, the environment and the Apple, that culture. I mean, I'm sure that, the reason everybody was excited, it was a part of the culture, and that comes from the leadership itself. Are those things from your early exposure in leadership, how to run the companies, are some of those lessons you were able to take into your startups?
Yes. So when you do in my journey, I always picked up on previous experience. A certain bit of always experience shapes you as a person and your perspective. And the journey in Apple definitely helped me, at least from really understanding how do you bring the company together and create that excitement part of it. How do you create exciting products, right? And that can potentially change the world. It's not Apple was a consumer product, in our world, in my world at least, we've been the enterprise space. It's not I call it apples to apples here.
Yeah.
But you learn from the way they think about it, the way they do things, the way they approach things is certainly an art to that part of it. There's an art to delivering a story, right? So, and there's an art to enthralling an audience, in our roles, we are always in front of an audience, right? Whether it's your customers, whether investors, whether it's internal teams. Leadership is always about, telling. You have to tell a story over and over again, and connect with the audience, right? So those are things I certainly picked it up, and obviously, the journey after that, the journey with SkillNet was really a foundational part, right? So how do we again, the sales part and the journey that we did together at SkillNet, part of it was certainly also helped us part of it. So I would say every bit of my career has helped in the journey forward, right? You pick some pieces, add it up. You don't realize it, but it adds up to your way of thought process, your way of thinking.
When did you know that, you wanted to do your own startup in SkillNet? Like there was pivotal moments, because I know I remember when we used to set for T's and acceptance, you used to say, okay, I want to be CEO, I want to open a company. And there used to be jokes around that. But, I know there was a drive in you, like people could see that you wanted to do, there was something driving you to go that direction. Is there, could you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's the journey started even in my earlier days, like, and go back to even IBM days, right? So where part of, and again, this is all things coming together, but part of things of when I came to US, I came to Bay Area, right? And you see a level of energy in Bay Area which is different than any other place in the country. So we have to travel to other places, but Bay Area was especially, there's always the notion of you can go and create your own thing, right? And whether it's realistic or not, but people have this concept of they can change the world and through technology, right? So, and I see it firsthand in Apple, of technology could completely change the world if we need to, right? So, and it's a driver of force in driving new things. So I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by that journey. So when I was in IBM, one of the reasons I probably left IBM early was because I had made up my mind that my journey is going to be leading up to my own, right? So the startup part of it, and I don't see a path of being in a corporate. So why I would go and waste time? So when the call from SkillNet came in, I felt like, hey, having a small company experience would help, right? So of being scrappy and also having that experience of sales would help, because at the end of the day, startups, you got to go and sell and other parts. So I haven't done a sales role before that. So I thought it would end up being good. I ended up spending 5.5 years in SkillNet, which in hindsight, so if it's always going to be, but things just flew by, and I truly enjoy the journey, and enjoy the people like you, and have a long, I would say, a lifelong relationship now with the people I've worked with. But I always had this notion that I'm going to do a startup, right? So which was the step I'm going to end up with. The journey in SkillNet definitely helped in how, again, problem solving and working with people, working with customers, working with partners, selling in sometimes very difficult scenarios, and losing, right? So I've lost deals, and you learn from that and why you lose deals as well. So that kind of set up for a good journey in the startup. So in the startup world, it's fairly, in my philosophy, you need two roles in startup, right? So you either need to build a product or build a service, and you need to sell. And if the one person can do both, then you don't need anybody. You can go and start on your own, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't, and in my case, I don't know how to build. I could know how to sell and go to the market. So was fortunate to go and work with meet Bosco, who's my current co-founder, and again, the story on Bosco is I met through Anurag, who was my boss at SkillNet. And so again, Bosco and Anurag were common friends. The kids went together, so we just went through a common connection, and we built upon that. So, but having met Bosco, and I think I had arrived at a situation where he had very common goals of, he had already done a startup and sold it to Oracle, but he was looking at a second startup. So the things kind of click and align and say, hey, it's the right time. I have a team now. Right? So I have a team, somebody I can go into the market, but I need somebody who can help put together. And when Bosco is one of the most amazing technical minds I've ever worked with, and he had really good solutions for some of the problems we are seeing in the enterprise market, especially on security. And so we brought together and then just click, and then make a hard decision to venture out of a very comfortable job, which was what it was at some point, and to say into an unknown called startup. But that journey again was a 5-6 year planning part of it, where you always had in the back of the mind to got to do it, and it's part attributable to being in the Bay Area. I would assume, like if I was in any other place, I may not have that big of a drive. Then you're fascinated in the Bay Area, looking at you're going and driving by a Google office or a Facebook office, and you're fascinated by their journeys or how small they were, started in a garage or a dorm room, and now they're massive companies and public companies. And so, Bay Area has proof points around, building at scale. But what you learn as part of doing startups is, there's this, like 9 out of the 10 startups don't make it. Or probably 98% don't make it, right? So it's an incredibly high risk game. And so while you think about Google and Facebook, but they are outliers, and there's a huge part of the curve that is in the between part of it. But again, I've been fortunate in the journey so far. With my first startup, we were in a good place, good time, and we had an early exit. And the second startup, the marketing starting to pick up. So we're always blissful of that. But it's always a long journey, and that's what I keep telling everybody who wants to do a startup is have a very long vision of things and be prepared for a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah. There are so many nuggets in there, and what I took away from that was that it's important to surround yourself with the like-minded people, and you never know which one will click, but you don't make a relationship because it will click, but you make relationship because you want to be with like-minded and people looking forward. And then, being in surroundings there where people are doing good work. Like if you're surrounded by people who are just doing 9 to 5 and that's all they care, and you're less likely to think about doing something great in your life. So you mentioned that 98% of startups fail, which is a fact. It's not like you're making up. But what would you think are the reasons they fail after successfully done to startups? Is it idea? Is it sales? Is it, what is it that you really need to have to make, be successful in doing startups?
Yeah, I think every it's a great question, and this is something I've learned. When you go in my first startup, I probably did not have awareness of all of that, but since then I've spent time talking to other CEOs, looking at our own perspectives, and there are three risks that obviously can kill a startup, right? And I always put as the three ones where there's one thing called a market risk, right? So market risk is you're bringing a product that market doesn't want. You're too early into the market, too late in the market. It's not the absolute need. And so timing matters, and timing matters in many things. So many of the challenges many startups fail is they've been too early into the market. And they're bringing in a concept which market is probably 5-10 years away from doing that. And, and we have seen this from just take delivery from which DoorDash and Instacart has. And, we had Peapod and others during .com days doing, web-based, you can do delivery of groceries, right? So it's a simple concept. It's just that the infrastructure and the timing was not there. The imperatives were people are not on phones at that much, right? So in a lot of cases, timing matters, and there are ways to mitigate that. The ways to do that is to go and spend time with customers to really understand what their need is versus in what many people will come with. And I have done the mistake many times is you go with an approach saying, this is what I feel, and versus what the market needs. And that's a cardinal mistake, because what you feel may not be what the market wants. And so you have to be adaptable. You have to be you have to really listen and sometimes be humble and say, yes, I am totally wrong, and this is what the market really needs.
Yeah.
So market risk is a big risk, right? So if bringing something the market doesn't want, I think that's the cardinal sin everybody makes, and especially in the Valley, where we have really smart technology people who will go and say, hey, I have an idea, and because that idea has come from their experience or what their thought process is. But they haven't done enough research in the market, really understood the market or the customer audience to say, what do you really care? What do you really want? And build something which brings that delight, right? So in everything you do, it has to be a incredible benefit for whether you're in the enterprise or the customer to do that part. And there's a lot of trial and error in that process. So, and you have to give yourself enough time. And so what happens is people will give 6 months and they'll bring something, build something, take it to the market. It fails, they'll say, hey, I'm not built for startup. And that's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to time. It's hard to go and predict what the customer market really needs, because you have to invest a lot of energy, and then you have to time it, right? So the market conditions have to be, and so like in the case of delivery and other things like Uber, for example, took off after phones, but the concept has existed of, how do you go and ask for cars in that part, but that really took off when you had a device in people's hand with GPS and everything aligned on that, right? So sometimes you have to align around the market conditions, and so the way startups should think about it, they ought to think about what the current trends are and how they're going to shape up in the next few years, and make a bet on those trends, and that comes from intimate knowledge, intimate research part of it. So I would say market risk is the biggest risk people have, right? So the second risk is what's called financial risk, which is you're going to run out of money. And it's because the revenue is hard, and whether you are consumer or enterprise startup, but your expenses are front loaded, right? So you're spending a lot of money on people, you're paying, and then building something cool, but you have to invest. And so you have to really balance out. And many companies, the financial risk is you run out of money at some point. And that can be mitigated by investments and being judicious about how you spend your money. But financial risk is the second thing. The third is why I call it execution risk, is many startups die by suicide. Is they would do bad things, or I wouldn't say bad, but there are two things which are contrary and counterintuitive in the hindsight. But in the moment of things, you you make a bet on product, you make a bet on the market, you make a bet on some things which can prove fatal. And if you don't look at the fundamentals, so if the market is right, if you got money, many of the companies have folded because they just didn't execute, and that's part of it. Those three risks exist in every startup, every stage, and as part of your journey, you have to go and figure out how to mitigate that risk.
That I think is a goal right there for people who are thinking of building startups. One thing that comes to mind is, is there a thing like when you're doing startup, you're small, timing on when you borrow? Like sometimes if you borrow or get investment too early and you have too much cash flow, it can also have a negative impact on the execution side, right?
Yeah. Too much money can lead to bad habits, right? So and so you have to be judicious about, even though you mitigate a financial risk, are you investing in the right part and be frugal, right? So the famous thing is Jeff Bezos, when Amazon, even though they're public and all, like they did not have free fruit, free snacks, and they were very frugal about delivering every penny back to the customer, right? So it's a deliberate strategy around that part. Doesn't mean you have to spend money, and you have to sometimes overspend money on the right things. And in some cases, it's a capital game. In some markets, it's a capital game. And I would say if you're building an online marketplace, it's a capital game. You have to go and be the number one. So you have to just spend money to become a number one. And some markets are like that. Winner takes all. That, and in some companies, if you've seen this with Uber or DoorDashes of the world, like it's a race to who captures the biggest market. And once you have that, it's a self-sustaining thing, and the winner takes all kind of prize. So in those markets, there's no other choice, but you have to raise a lot of money and then just go execute. But not all markets are built like that, right? So there are certain markets where the third or the fourth player have come in and taken their time and really out-executed that part of it. So you have to understand your market. You have to look at past history of those companies and really have a clear strategy and a plan in mind on how you're going to spend your money. Because if you raise money without a plan, then it ends up being, hey, we just want to throw money on certain things and see what works, right? So which is not always a good plan. So right now, the environment we are in, I think it's a good time to be a startup because there's a lot of money floating around. But sometimes it goes back to .com days, money also meant that a lot of bad ideas came up, which should not have done in the first place, right? So sometimes we get into this bubble where every idea is getting funded, and that leads to bad habits as well. So I think entrepreneurs should be very cognizant of taking very early on money, right? So once you have gotten a certain foothold, you can go and accelerate, but very early on, you can be scrappy, you can be frugal. But doesn't mean you have to bootstrap all the time, and you can raise some money because you can bring in some incredible people who are working in an industry and they don't want to work for free, right? So so you can bring in money enough to bring in a really good, solid team and sell and execute on that vision. But it doesn't take much to do a startup these days. And you can be frugal about it. Everything is available in cloud. If you want to build a product, all tools are available. So it's an amazing time to anybody to do a startup. It's very democratized now, and so you can be anywhere and have access to some capital. But also there's a cautionary tale of taking too much money early
on. So if I am, or somebody listening, who is 9 to 5, like you mentioned, it's a right time or very good time to be doing startups and wants to do startups and has an idea, how do you know whether this idea is good or bad? How do you test?
No, I think it's one thing I would say is don't leave your job to go and do a startup, which I've seen in many cases. I've done the mistake as well. Is before you have to get to a level where there is a closer to a product market fit, right? So you won't have a complete fit, but you're going from a PowerPoint to some assumptions based on data, and those data is based on initial set of customers. And if you have to coming to a point where there are, in the enterprise world, there you have 10, 20 people ready to buy and give a check saying tomorrow. For me, I think money is a very great indicator of priorities and interest, right? So, and in what the challenge mistake most people do is will talk to their friends, and friends will say that's an amazing idea and as part of it. But you have to really go and talk to a stranger who has a pain point, and if you're able to convince that person that they are ready to part ways, ready to pay, and if you have more than 20, let's say a statistically equivalent number, you know that you are on a path, right? This is a concept that people are ready to pay. This is hitting a pain point, and if there are a large number of those people, then you have a market, right? So essentially having some level of a product and a market fit, and that period is incredibly important, and that period is one of the hardest, right? Because you have to go and talk to as many people as possible, really test out, and in some cases not even go with your product, but really understand their pain point and say, hey, what's the biggest pain points you have? And so in many cases, some of the largest public companies have started with a very different idea, and they quickly pivoted to something the market wanted. And you have to be ready with that, right? So the mistake I've done in the past is I've gone with a concept in mind, and I've gone to people and say, well, what do you think about it? But I didn't really ask what their pain point was. What are their life? What are they going through? I went and showed my product concept and saying, do you like it or not? Right? Which is, I think, is a wrong approach, right? The right approach should be really going and talking to the person, saying, hey, really understanding their pain point and what are the biggest pain points they have. And then showing a concept saying, hey, I may have something which addresses your core pain point. And this is and would you be interested to buy? So I think my recommendation to many startups is always that take that market validation fairly seriously. Now, if you're in the industry where you're absolutely in and you have a Rolodex of 50 customers tomorrow that can come and buy, all means do it. In many cases in the Valley, we are technologists and we have built technology. We don't have that Rolodex. And so you have to go and build that Rolodex, right? You have to go into LinkedIn and start people and say, hey, I want to have coffee and I want to show you something. I want to talk about something, right? So, and not even show something, right? So which is a wrong product, because if you're already asking and feedback on a concept, you are seeding that customer, and most people will not say bad things. So they are nice people.
Yeah.
Right? So they say, yeah, it makes sense, right? But it's a wrong approach, right? They're never going to buy that because it's not a priority, right? So what people have to understand is even though if the concept is good, unless it's an absolute priority or not. So the test is, again, going back, is people are ready to spend money. If they're saying, I'm ready to give you a check, if you can give me that, and this is again an enterprise way of doing things, right? So in the consumer world, slightly different. They may not pay for it, but if they are ready to use it, and a lot of people are, and they are ready to recommend to their friends and do it, you're hitting a sweet spot there, right? So there's different nuances, but it boils down to you have to really address a product market fit very early on, and it's okay to take time, because if you build something the market is not ready, that's going to cost you years in a lost R&D investment and other things.
Amazing. I think that's a very valuable message there, how to test your idea and make sure the money is the indicator. If people are ready to pay for that idea, you are on the right track. Last question. I know we have to run. Tell us a little bit about Privacera and what it does, what problem it is solving. So if somebody is interested, and then how do that person get in touch with you or somebody in your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Privacera is an exciting journey where today we are the intersection of data analytics, and what we call as data governance. Essentially, we help enterprise teams who are looking to leverage data for analytics, AI, and ML balance compliance and security, and with that, and we help companies address two main questions, right? So what data they have, what is sensitive and non-sensitive, and that is a hard question for many enterprises because data comes from multiple sources and sits in the cloud. You really don't know what is sensitive and not as part of that. The second question is, how do we make sure right people have access to right data only for the right purpose, which is around entitlements and authorization, which is, again, a hard question, a hard part to answer because those controls can exist in a variety of databases and applications. And you have to stitch all of that together to say somebody accessing the data can only see this data. And that's something we are going and helping with, providing them a platform which gives them visibility on the data, but also helps them manage policies of access at a pretty fine grain level. And we can take those policies and enforce on any part of the data infrastructure, whether it's databases, whether it's storage layer. So the net result is, let's say if the customers are using Snowflake, that they can govern these rules in one place and they can set those rules. And if users are accessing Snowflake, they only have access to the data they're supposed to. And so in net effect of that is customers can leverage Snowflake, can leverage the cloud to do more analytics. At the same time, they can go and say, hey, we are adhering to a data governance or compliance or a security mandate. And so that's something we help with. So we help companies balance that mandates with the need to use data. And we're excited to work with companies across every industry. So to get in touch is to our website, privacera.com, privacera.com. And leave your contact information and we'll be in getting touch. But you're solving a fundamental problem. We're helping customers in their data journey.
Amazing. And I'll, we'll put the company link in the episode and show notes. But that's amazing. And in a nutshell, if you want to have security around your data or how that data is accessed, there is the problem that Privacera is solving. And I'm just compressing what you meant, but if
that's perfect.
Has that requirement of especially when you're accessing data. For example, we are in Europe, and one of the challenges I saw the company when they wanted to hire people working in US doing some engineering work, they always were mandated. They could not do that work in US because they could not prove that it was federated properly and those structure was there to support so that data is secure going out of the country and yet mandated by the laws of this country and that country. So amazing. Thank you so much for this time. It went quick. I learned so much about your journey and there was such good information. I am sure anybody who's wanting to do a startup or already doing startup can learn a lot from your journey. And I wish you all the luck. And I know, you're going to do great things ahead also.
No, I appreciate, again, super appreciative of the time. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and share my journey as well. I appreciate that. So, fantastic knowing you. Really excited about this new path you're taking, Manpreet.
All right. Thank you. See you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did and got some valuable nuggets out of it. If you liked it, there are other shows you can watch and they're exactly what you need. And I ask you to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of the show. Really, I want to hear from you firsthand what you felt, what you liked, what you didn't like. So thank you and see you around.